All right, hi everyone. I'm Kasey Uhlenhuth. I'm a program manager on the .NET and Visual Studio team at Microsoft. Hopefully you're here for the .NET code style talk, or else you're in the wrong room. So now's your chance to escape. So it's my first time to Amsterdam. Pretty excited. Never been here. I noticed that walking over almost got killed by a lot of bicycles. And like the trolley thing that just like stops randomly and then goes again. And you're like, whew, didn't know that was coming. So, I realized, biking here is a lot different than it is in America, which made me realize, we all have preferences. So, in America, we prefer to ride bicycles like this. Safety first, like hands on both handlebars, just cruising. Whereas here, helmets like aren't a thing. We got like a child in the front. People are on their phones while they're bicycling. They're like carrying a bunch of other stuff, like in little extra baskets everywhere. Some people have coffee in the other hand with the phone in this one. And then like there's never just one child, there's like always another one too. And so that made me realize, we all have different preferences, and like the bike is like this flexible tool that we have where we can adjust our different preferences accordingly. Just like with code style, we all have our own preferences. And so that's what we try to do in Visual Studio 2017, is allow anyone to enforce and configure their own flexible code style so that everyone can be happy. So, for the rest of this talk, we're going to talk about how you can configure and enforce your code style in Visual Studio 2017 and why you would want to do this anyways. Here's the agenda. We'll basically go through a lot of concepts, then show some demos. We'll go on some brief tangents because you can't talk about var and explicit type without going through a deep dive on it or like going off to address some things that people always question about. And then we'll talk about the gaps in the experience today and what we're working on next. And then if you have questions, feel free to ask them. If you have questions, like a burning question in the middle of the talk, feel free to like raise your hand and I'll get to it then. All right, so why do we care about code style in the first place? Code style helps make your code base readable, which is really important for two reasons. The first is maintainability of your code base. So if everything looks the same and is organized the same, then if you have a bug, it's easier to read through your code, figure out where the bug might be. Also, if you're trying to add a new feature, if all code is like jumbled up, it's like really hard to figure out where you actually need to write the new feature. So that's for maintainability's sake, why readable code is great. The other reason is accessibility to newcomers. When you're that new guy on the team and you have to read people's code and every file looks like it's written by a different person, it makes it a lot harder to like ramp up on your team. And so that's why readability is great. But what is readable code? So readable code is really comprised of three things. First is clear. So clear names, unlike me, where every temporary variable is x and then xx and then xxx because it's way easier to type. You need to actually give your variables meaningful names. The second is it needs to be consistent. So if you're using like Csharp 7 tuples, then you shouldn't be using the old tuple type as well. You should just focus on one. And then it needs to be organized. So if you're using Almond braces in one spot, you need to use it everywhere. If you always have your fields before properties, then do that everywhere in your code base. If every type is in a file with the same name, then you do that everywhere instead of nesting multiple types in one file. And so that's what makes code readable. So, being the PM for code style features in Visual Studio, I talked to a lot of developers about why they care about code style, and so this is what you all have told me. Dev leads care about consistency so much that they're like, I will pay you however much it costs to make my entire code base consistent. Then we have those types of developers who see art or see writing code like an art form where everything needs to be beautiful and perfect, and if they see a file that's not perfectly consistent, then they like freak out and they immediately have to clean it up as soon as they see it in order to just like read through the file. So you might be that person on your team, or that person on your team. And then you have other people who If it runs and does what it's supposed to do, that's all that matters. I could care less what coding style you have with it. And so as we write the features in Visual Studio to help you enforce code style, we have to basically make sure all three of these types of people are happy. So we have to have that sculptor, like artistic code writer has to feel like he has the flexibility to enforce what he wants on his team, while also the person who could care less about code style needs to not be inhibited by the code style enforcement that we have. So with that, let's take a look at what we have in Visual Studio today. So first of all, let's see what the white space actually looks like in this file. So if I view the white space, whew, we got a nice, healthy mix of spaces and tabs in here, which this might be like killing your eyes right now. So on your local machine, we have tools options. You can come in here, code style, Csharp. No, I don't actually want to do that. Everything's so beautifully nested. Okay, so we have tabs. So in here, you can choose if you want tabs or spaces. If you choose spaces, you could choose what the size of it is. So do we want tabs or spaces in this? I heard spaces first. We're going spaces. So it's already configured that way. So if you do Control ED, that basically formats the whole document. And so now everything is beautifully spaces instead. And so that was just a format document command. But there's so many other things we can change with formatting. So by default, Visual Studio has what's called Almond braces, where, oh, but I don't have them. We're usually, let's exit out of this. You have something like this. Whew. And some people really hate this by default, where every brace is on a new line. So those options are also configurable in here. So if you go under code style, formatting down here, then you can choose how you want your new lines. So you can make them all almond braces, or if you really hate that, we can uncheck all of them. There's a lot of options, I know. So there's already moans of despair. And now we can format everything. Oh, look, I lost so many lines of code. It's so beautiful. It's great. So you can choose to do formatting however you want. In Visual Studio 2017, so that stuff I just showed has been around forever. But in Visual Studio 2017, we now have this general thing in here, where now you can choose if you want this dot preferred or not, if you want people to say int32 versus int, var preferences. So if you're like, psh, always use var, you can now configure this to be an error. So if people don't use var, it's a compiler error, and things like that. So now, if I come in here, you have to usually make a code edit for it to apply. But now, look at this. Oh, it's a beautiful thing, isn't it? I do have to say, with tools options, if you configure things in there, it will not actually break your build if it has an error. We'll continue on that later, but remember, tools options will not break your build. It'll just show as an error, so in your error list. Whew, that's a lot of places I need to use var. Luckily, you can actually apply, fix all of these at once. So if you use Control Dot, it'll bring up the little light bulb menu, and you can fix all occurrences in the document, project, or solution. So we can just go ahead, do this, be like, yeah, and look at that. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. And so, okay, that's basically the beginnings of how you can enforce code style inside of Visual Studio 2017 for your individual machine. So let's just undo all of that for later. All right, do we have any questions about the basics of what you can do on your local machine? Yeah? Yeah, so let's go back. You can choose how you want to enforce them. So in here, I said, I want to prefer the explicit type, but I can choose to prefer var as well. So you can choose which way you want to go. What is slightly confusing to some people is I can say here I want to prefer the explicit type, and the error doesn't mean if you see the explicit type squigglet, it means if you don't have the explicit type, report it as an error. So sometimes people read it backwards, but that's the way to read it. Was that your question? What's the other half of the question? Yes, so when I did the fix all to make var into the explicit type everywhere, if you have your configuration set the other way, then it will switch everything to var. Yep. All right, so I mentioned var versus explicit type, which people are like, oh my god, is there an actual difference if you use var with the explicit type? Like, will one of them make my code more performant, etc.? So I went to the compiler dev lead, who's a good friend of mine. I was like, Jared, people are going to ask this question. What do I say? So I wrote down exactly what he said, which is for all intents and purposes, there's no compile time or runtime difference between using var and the equivalent explicit type. There are like 3 edge cases, which I'm not going to go into here. And he told me he would like basically murder me if I told you what those were, because he actually doesn't think you should care. So if you prefer var, use var. If you prefer explicit type, use explicit type. And you should think that there's no performance difference between the two. All right. Woo! So into our first battle of whether we prefer var or the explicit type. So let's see. Oh, I lost my survey when I restarted. So let's see what you all said. Oh. Do. All right. Okay. Ooh. So it looks like var is winning next to sometimes var, sometimes explicit type, and explicit type, not doing so well. Oh, and then 2 of you don't care, so great. So I then went to the compiler team, so it's the people, who are writing this stuff. Like, what do they prefer? So let's see. The first one's pretty tongue-in-cheek, but, he says, too repetitious to use explicit type. var, all the things. And then the last 2 prefer var in certain cases. So like if the explicit type is somewhere in the declaration, then you don't need to use it, but otherwise you do. Or you can use var, otherwise you can use explicit type. So that's what the compiler team thinks, so you can use that in your team debates or not, whatever you want to do. But basically you can see within our own team, there's no consensus on code style, so that's why we have to allow you to do what you need to do. All right, tabs versus spaces. How do we feel about this one? Oh, surprise! I was not expecting that one. So tabs is the winner, the majority. But more people don't care this time, so that's comforting, I guess. So what does the compiler team think? Oh, first of all, if you've seen Silicon Valley, this is how I tell everyone what I work on for a living. If they've seen Silicon Valley, I'm like, the tabs versus spaces, that's me. All right, so consistency, doesn't matter. Definitely spaces. So again, not a whole lot of consensus on the team, but people seem to care a little bit less about tabs and spaces than explicit type and var. So if you're wondering what the open source community thinks in .NET, this one guy analyzed the top 400,000 repos on GitHub for tabs and spaces. So right here is the Csharp one. So spaces are preferred over tabs. But apparently the Netherlands is different, so, tabs for the win. Which C and Go are the other tab-heavy languages, so pretty interesting. All right, last one. Last time I gave this talk, people didn't know what these braces were called, but Almond is where it's exactly what's on your left over there, where you have your braces on a new line every single time, and then K and R is where you have them more inline. So, how do you all feel about those? There was lots of moaning when I was changing that, so. Oh, wow. Nice. Like, vast majority prefer the Visual Studio default. And that's why we can't change the default. So, so when you're like, why does it have to be almond braces? That was why. So, yeah. So again, compiler team does not prefer the default. Oh, but then they do. And so if any of you know Anders, I'm going to butcher his last name, Heilsberg, who basically invented Csharp. In our language design meetings for Csharp, he will not look at a code sample if it is formatted in almond braces, so we have to write everything in K and R. So, you know, some people are really hardcore about code style. So, and then this was like the last quote I'm going to leave with you all, where pretty much people are actually pretty flexible about code style, except for like one or two things. And so, yeah. Putting a comment there is pretty atrocious, so. Does anyone do this? Yeah, okay. Oh, speaking of which, I forgot to show you. The other thing that you can do in here is we're actually changing. So I'll show you later, like we're having a new way to enforce code style besides tools options. But one of the things in here is that we have way too many options. For example, the ability to put, here we go, a space after the dot and a space before the dot, which you wouldn't. So I'm like, you know, do we really need this option? So just to show you what this would look like. First of all, has anyone changed those? Yeah, okay, see, I don't think anyone changes those, so why support them? But let's take a look at this. Ooh, nice. There's a bug where it doesn't work in lambdas, but clearly we're never going to fix this, so yeah. So, but this is the thing, so, you know, I'm like using this as why we're going to like cut that feature out. So one day this option will disappear, so I've taught it to you just long enough for us to pull it out later. But good to know that no one actually does this. So. But now I gotta fix it because I can't look at that. Okay. All right, whew. We're leaving. All right, so next thing, naming. Naming, as we all know, is very difficult. Just look at the Visual Studio versioning, for example. We're now on like Visual Studio 2017 version 15.4, which is like, what kind of name is that? So naming is very difficult. But it's part of good code style. So the hardest part of naming is we have multiple word identifiers. For example, robot, chicken test. And so if you don't put in like little alternating caps in there, it's really hard to read. So we have this thing called camel case. So I tried putting little illustrations for why some of these got their names. So camel case, because like little humps on the camel. But it starts out small and gets a little hump. We have Pascal case. Then we have the underscore, which people like to use for private fields. And again, we have to like write, we can't make up some of these naming rules, you know? And like some people have even crazier ones than these common ones. And we have to be able to write a tool that lets you express your naming conventions on your entire code base. So this is the kind of challenges we work on. We have all caps. We have snake case, which the snake illustration is supposed to show why it's like a snake, which I come from Python, so I do this on accident all the time, and then I have to change it to Pascal case. It's a pain in the butt. We have kebab case, which yeah, it's like a little skewer through all your little words. Studly caps, which is, you know, just, I looked it up to see if there was actually a rule, which apparently sometimes it's vowels are lowercase and consonants are uppercase. I mean, sometimes it's the other way around, and sometimes it's totally random. So that's still the caps. And then I learned there's a thing called Hungarian notation, which never heard of that before, but it's where you like put the purpose of it in the front. So if this is a method, then put function in the front so people know it's a method. But anyway, so we have to now write a tool that allows you to write all of these, which is pretty difficult. And there's also other naming rules that we don't even know about that people prefer. So this is what we tried to do. So we can go tools, options again. There was another little option down here called naming, where then you can choose basically what like symbols you want it to apply to, the style you want it to have, and then the severity level that you want to enforce that in your editor. So we can add a new one where we want private and internal fields. Okay, there's no underscore one, so kind of have to like make a new style. So we'll call it underscore, the prefix that we require. So it's kind of like crazy, but we try to like come up with the best thing we could to let you make your own naming rules. So this is how it goes. And then here's a little preview. So this is what you want, an underscore and then camel case afterwards. And then now we have underscore. And then we'll make it a warning if you don't do it. So now, I'm not zoomed in. If I come up here, I don't know, and make hairstyle. Oh, also we have the smart variable naming feature, which will apply your coding convention in it. So the names that we suggest to you, because I'm in a private field now, will be like, oh, you should use underscore. If you don't, then we'll squiggle it as a warning, like I had before, and says I have a naming violation, and then we'll enforce it there. Cool. We do not have a fix all for naming right now, because it's unclear on what exactly that would mean for a user. Would it fix all like private fields must have underscore everywhere? Or would it fix all naming everywhere? Or what would it mean? So we have to figure out what exactly that's going to be. But that's how you can do naming inside Visual Studio 2017. All right, so the next thing is, at Microsoft, we have like an entire research division, and one of our divisions actually looked at like Microsoft productivity, and they found that 1/3 of all of our code reviews involve code style like violations in them. So people being like, use var, use Almond braces, etc., which seems like a massive waste of time to like spend your code review and like people having to like resubmit their pull requests fixing code style issues all the time. So our way of fixing this is with editor config. So in Visual Studio 2017, we worked with the editor config community. So for those of you who don't know what editor config is, it's like an open source file format. It's just like a text file that travels with your source code. There's like basic rules that are in it right now, like tabs for spaces, what your indent style is, and like, you know, what kind of line endings you want. And so we worked with them to extend it to now work for .NET style rules as well. And so the way it works is you just put the file in a directory, and it'll apply to every file inside that directory. And so like, here's a kind of example. So like here, the top editor config will apply to files 1 through 4. And if you want to overwrite any of those files, you can now put another one in a subdirectory and it'll apply. So the second editor config applies only to 3 and 4. Cool. So let's see what that looks like. So again, let's view our white space in here. Oh, gotta spell view right. Okay. Oh, I didn't, well, okay. Well, I don't have my mix anymore. Undo, undo, undo. Ah, there we go, okay. So, highly recommend you install MADS-K's extension called Editor Language Services, by the way. It will make writing an editor config file easier. We haven't yet been able to build it into the product yet, but that's our like extension that you can install to get it. But here is an editor config file, which I've commented out so the other demos worked. So you can see it's just a file format, or just a text file, essentially. And so you can say like indent size. You can say up here, I want spaces. And then now what you can do is say like, oh, I only want these rules to apply to Csharp and VB files. And so we have all sorts of different things, like whether you prefer this or me, the int32 versus int stuff. So it's all the same stuff that you saw in the tools options, just now in here. And let's see, do I have var in here? Yes, so here are my var rules. So you can see here, I want to prefer, so the way that works is you say, do I prefer var? No, I don't. I prefer explicit type, so you put false. And then you can choose how you want to enforce it, just like you did in tools options. So you can say warning, error, or severity. So right now, if you put something as an error, similar to tools options, it will not break your build, but we're working on like right now where the compiler will actually be able to read an editor config file. So if you set something as an error in editor config, it will actually break your build. So if you're a real stickler on your team, you can just make every single thing an error, and people won't be able to build if they violate code style. So for the first day, it'll really suck, but after that, it'll be great. We do have a slight bug where if you have any files open while you edit an editor config file, you have to reopen it for the rules to apply. So that's what I just did right there. So again, now I can do format document, and it'll make it all spaces because that's what I said in my editor config. Let's see, and now you can see all my vars, rather than being errors, are warnings because that's what I put in my editor config. So if you have an editor config file, it will override your tools options settings. And that's because it takes precedence because it's your team's code style rules. So you can see in my solution, I have an editor config file applying to all my projects within that. Now the problem is, what if I don't care in unit tests? Why is this? I don't know why this is showing as an error. Let me. There we go. Okay. A lot of closing and reopening files right now, but it'll be fixed soon in 15.5, I think. So you can see here that I have var as a warning in both of these because that's my editor config says. But what if in unit tests, like I don't care if you use var or not? Like if you write a test, please just write a test. Like I don't care. So you can add that other editor config file in here. So I can add one. And so with Mads K's extension, it's just like in the add menu now. I can add an editor config. Let me open my other editor config. And let's just override the var settings. So where are you, var? Oops. Let's take this, paste it. And now let's say, yeah, we want var allowed in here. We actually prefer var. And then what you can do is you can make it none. And so none will make it that so that there's no editor decoration inside of there. So if you use none or not, it doesn't matter. Like we won't trigger it. But what the true or false does is if you like do introduce local variable, it'll prefer whatever your style is there. So even though it won't squiggle anything that's wrong, but if you inline a variable here, it'll put it with var, or if you introduce a local variable, it'll put var instead of the explicit type. So for code generation purposes, that's what the true or false there means. So now, gotta close everything. But if I open this file, you'll now see that my vars don't have any green squiggles, whereas if I open up, oh, nope. This one, it does. And so you can have, oh, I don't even know why it's going red. That looks like a bug in my Franken build. But anyways, you can tell that there's different settings between the two, and that's what editor config lets you do. Cool. Any questions on editor config? Yeah. So the question is, how does editor config work with Roslyn analyzers? Great question. So right now, Roslyn analyzers, you have to use a rule set file to configure them. the goal is to make it like basically sunset the rule set file and have everything in editor config. And so the way that will probably work, we're still hashing out the final design, but it'll probably be like whatever the code is. So if it's like CS rules, I think we decided it'll be like something like this, and you'll do that. So if all the rules have the same error code, you can just like have some kind of like regex. That means any file coming from this, you can do this too. Or you would just do the actual error code name like that. Yeah. Any other questions on editor config? Yeah. Oh, so the question is, does everyone have to install that extension to get editor config to work? No. The only thing that does is it colorizes this file. So instead of it being all black text, it like has the nice little IntelliSense in here and things like that. Oop. Oh no. Oh no. Ooh. This is why you don't run the dog food build of Visual Studio. You can do it. Oh, it works in that line. Well. Anyways, back to slides. All right. All right. Oh, shoot. Okay. Well, so the next thing that happens is you introduce your editor config file, and now you have like 100 style violations. What can you do? So back to Visual Studio. Nope. All right. Let's just kill this. All right. I'm sure you all know this experience quite well. All right. Okay. But hey, detour for 15.5, you'll notice that our startup times are going to be better. So this is 15.5. No negativity. Okay. So what happens now? Also, we have what? Okay. If I come to Team Explorer, you'll notice that there's these weird, we now like have built in how many errors, warnings, and messages you have, and that's if you install the CI tool, because what we're eventually going to do is try to make it, if you use editor config, then we're going to surface to you at the moment that you're committing where all your style and error violations are, so you can just like view them and see them. Which, huh? Yeah? Oh, so the question is which things, it's whatever's in your error list is popping up in there. So if you have code style violations that are in the error list, they'll show up here. If you run a code analysis tool, like if you have custom rosin analyzers, they'll also show up there as well. Yeah, so you can see, like, seeing 56 errors is like kind of crazy. So if you're not going to fix them all, you can like select everything in here, and you can right-click and suppress them all if you want. So you can suppress, wait, I probably shouldn't be telling you this because it defeats the whole purpose. But if you do have that one like legacy project where everyone's like, I'm not touching anything in that code, like we all know that, then this is the tool for you, where you can either insert a bunch of pragmas in there with in source or have a suppression file that will do it. Yeah, so do it for everything. It might take a couple seconds to go through and figure out where all of these need to be suppressed, but then when you come in here, you'll have a global suppression file that suppresses them all. It's slowly adding to it right now, though, but yeah, woohoo! Look at that. And so that's how you can get rid of them if you have that. If you like, you can't see errors anywhere, and you have that one code base or one like file no one wants to touch. This is what you can do. Also, forgot to say, with editor config, if you have one file that no one wants to touch the code style of or that you don't care about, you can like write in the name of the file here instead. So you could do like, oops, sorry. And if you put it in here, then it'll apply the code style to just that file. So if you want to override the settings for one thing, you can put them in here like that. Cool. So that's how you suppress a bunch of stuff. So if that's what you're into. Don't recommend doing it, though, if your team really wants you to adhere to code style, because that would defeat the whole purpose. So gaps today, we don't have one-click cleanup yet. So a lot of people are like, oh, I violated all code style rules, like click, fix them all, like really easy, right? Right now you have to go through and do a fix all for everything, except naming, we don't have that yet. So we're currently designing this feature right now. I will probably be publishing our design notes on our GitHub. So if you want to leave feedback, read those, because this feature is way more difficult to design than you would think. Because like if you in your editor config you have a suggestion, do you want that to apply to your code cleanup or only errors and warnings, things like that, and at what scope? And what if you change a naming rule that's part of a public API? Do we let people do that, or do we be smart and be like, ooh, you probably don't want to name this? So we got to figure out all that. And then, as I was saying, editor config doesn't actually impact your build yet. So if you want to truly enforce this on the command line, we don't have that yet, but it'll be coming soon. And then it'll integrate with your whole CI system and things like that. Oh yeah. So, but yeah, here are some of the main questions we're trying to figure out with code cleanup today. So, like, what rules do people want to apply the most often? So, like, we feel like only once in a blue moon are you going to want to code clean up your entire code base. And a lot of people have like little scripts that they run like once a month to clean up the entire code base. So we have to like allow ultimate configurability for that. But do people actually like want that in VS, or they just want something like that format document thing that they apply on every open file that they have? So that's kind of like stuff that we're figuring out there. And in that survey I said, if you want to leave feedback, leave your email in there, because then I'll contact you and say, how do you clean up your team's code? So everything I just showed you, I finished documenting finally. So if you want to see all the different code style rules that you can actually configure with editor config, it's on docs.microsoft.com. Also, if you have any questions while your team is moving to editor config and things aren't going right, you can email me. Like, I want to know, so email me. It's pretty easy. Kasey, first letter of my last name. And then if you want, we can see what people said for the rest of them. So a lot of people will apply formatting and remove unnecessary usings. Ooh, some people don't have any code style. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so these are the two that we're most interested in. Is like, do people want to change var explicit type with this code cleanup command, or is that like too scary and people don't want that? So this will be interesting information. And then how often do people verify? I put that option in just for fun, to see if people would actually say, not as often as I would like. Cool. Yeah, never. One champion in the room. Cool. All right, so does anyone have any questions for me? Yeah. What was that? So is editor config in all versions of Visual Studio? No, it's only in 2017. All versions of 2017, yeah. Mm-hmm. When we get the command line stuff to work, though, that'll be in whatever version releases then, with that in it. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so the question is, when I ran that format document command, is it applying the tools options rules or the editor config? If there's an editor config file in your like repo for like that you have open, it'll apply the editor config settings, not tools options. But if you don't have an editor config, it'll apply the tools option settings. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, where can I get like a template to start from? It's not 100% accurate right now, but if you go to the core effects GitHub, they have an editor config on there, and that's the one that all .NET open source repos, like in the .NET Foundation, are gonna champion around. But we haven't formally met to discuss if this is the code style that we want to do. So it may change, but eventually this will be a good place to start. And then one day we'll actually build it into Visual Studio, so it'll be like a custom template that you can just add in. Yeah, but core effects is the one that we're gonna eventually gather around as the one true code style. It's not even really just whatever works for your team. Yeah. So the question is, what about style cop? A lot of people think that like Microsoft invented style cop. I think it was just like an employee did it one day, and so it's not like officially Microsoft endorsed. So it's like if you prefer style cop rules, like go for it. Yeah. So style cop, if you're using the built-in tool, it does, or if you're using the rosin analyzer for style cop, it does, and that's because it's using a rule set file. But once we have editor config, so once editor config replaces rule set, then it will also break the build. Yeah. So, but yeah, for now, if you want it to break the build, you have to use rosin analyzers that use the rule set file, or you have to use style cop. But soon, it'll break your build. Yeah. I've never heard anyone so excited to break builds, you know. Any other questions? Cool. Well, I'll be around this conference, so if you have any more questions, I'm pretty easy to spot. So, yeah. Thank you all.